Welcome to the Golden Nugget Podcast. This special edition, I guess we'll maybe call it a CGO talk.
Yeah.
We are at the National Guard Association of the United States Conference. Day one has just wrapped up. I am Captain CJ Beckman. I'm joined today by Lieutenant Joseph Lehman from the Utah Air National Guard and Lieutenant Jesse Call, also from the Utah Air National Guard. So I'm getting outnumbered here for sure.
We got you.
So
probably the only event here that's the case.
So we did have a fantastic day, very busy day today. Started off with the company grade officer professional development, the first of three sessions this weekend, where we had the opportunity to hear from the chief of the National Guard, General Hokanson. Then during our first business session, we heard from both the Chief of Staff of the Army, General James McConville, and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown Jr. So takeaways. What were some of your key thoughts, takeaways from any of the sessions? If there were one thing you were to boil down this entire day, what would be kind of that key takeaway that you think you'll remember the most?
A couple of things, actually. One of them is how much the active duty seems to appreciate the state partnership program. Mm-hmm. I mean, both of the chiefs of staff, and this is, I came to the conference last year, and that was a common theme too, is they harped on that state partnership program and its successes. Talked a lot about California and Ukraine and how big of a deal that was. And that's a mission that only the Guard can perform. And so to hear that, it was very, very appreciative. I really enjoyed hearing from all three of the 4 stars that we had here today. And but yeah, hitting on that state partnership program was encouraging to hear.
Yeah, I really would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when McConville was talking about going over to Ukraine and being able to receive the appreciation from the various countries around. I mean, part of me just kind of wonders if that's fluff because he's trying to motivate, and showing up. But I imagine, like you said, having the U.S. troops there just gave confidence to the area that will bring order to the chaos. Yeah,
that's the goal anyway.
Yeah, there's a part of me, I guess maybe this is the cynical, skeptical side of me is, how much of that is, playing to the audience. Right. Obviously, this is the National Guard Association. Sure. You're not gonna criticize the National Guard in front of the National Guard Association. But I guess the key thing is wondering is how much they understand the National Guard
versus active duty
when it really comes down to it, right? I think I got a lot more of that from General Brown.
Yeah.
Really seeing, because I think that for the Air Guard, a lot of that air power is distributed. A lot more of that air power is distributed to the Air National Guard. At least that's my perception.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more reliance on the Air National Guard. Active duty. I mean, even when I was at airborne school, it was the Ohio National Guard Ohio Air National Guard that was doing the lifts for us,
right?
For those air ops. There was a question particularly to General McConville that had to do with the ACFT and, National Guard preparing for the Army combat fitness test, getting injured and things like that, and not being in a duty status. And I don't know if he was prepared to answer that question. I mean, I don't think he was the person necessarily to ask that question to, but it was one of those things where I don't know if he'd ever really thought about that
from the Guard perspective.
From the Guard perspective of, here is a physical fitness test that that asks a lot more and has some exercises that have that when preparing for them, like a deadlift, have some innate risk in there. That's not something that the active duty really has to think about.
Well, and that's something that I think could be a whole nother topic of discussion because you've got 2 Air Guard guys in here.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at you like a deer in headlights, like, yeah, I mean, because he brought up some points like I can do planks at home, I can do XYZ at home. And so I don't fully understand the complete scope and breadth of the ACFT.
It's an interesting beast. I've had the opportunity to have some more direct involvement with that, I guess is the way you'd say. So I kind of knew what he was. I had a little bit more, I guess, than you would, understanding what he was talking about. What really impressed me is you can tell that he's thought about it. You can tell that this was not. I mean, you mentioned that maybe he wasn't the right person to ask that question. That's probably true. But I also got, and this is from all 3 of the 4 stars, some of the even very specific questions that they got were, they knew, you could tell that they had thought about it. They weren't just speaking off the cuff. They knew in depth exactly all of those answers.
They had been part of discussions
Oh, yeah.
before
Yeah.
on every question that was brought up.
On every single one. Yeah. And it was their depth, or I should say breadth of knowledge was impressive. It's, there was a question, this was to General Hokuson, and he said, Hokuson.
Yeah.
So he, and I forget what the question was, but he talked about the 22 different statuses. And granted, he's a guard officer, right? So he's going to understand this a little bit better than an active duty general. But he mentioned that guardsmen can be in any one of 22 different statuses at any given time, right? And to hear that, that's something that we see and struggle with on the admin side, right? Getting people in the right status and the right orders and the right mission. And to see that, I think all 3 of them mentioned the Title 10 versus Title 32 status, and just to see that they do have that understanding and that they're having that internal battle as well, that you have, different soldiers and airmen doing the same jobs as somebody in a different status, but the benefits are different. And that's a struggle. That's a big struggle.
Yeah. I really appreciate it. So staying on the subject of Hokanson, there's 2 things I really pulled away from him and his address to the CGOs was what he was doing at Washington with his 3 stars, or with his, it was 3 stars.
Yeah.
And all the other vices were 4 stars.
Right.
And he's like, you can have a much different conversation when you're a part of the table as a peer versus a subordinate.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's not my goal to promote everybody, but when you can say Mike instead of sir,
Right.
you can have a much different conversation and feel like you're being heard, or that you can speak up and be heard when you're among your peers versus your subordinates. So I thought that was really cool that he was looking at it from that perspective. And then secondly, I was really kind of motivated from, there was a lot of discussion, and he emphasized it, on writing to Congress. Like, I've always known that was something people do, but I always thought it was just kind of sending your voice into the abyss. Like, nobody's really on the other end to receive it. But JC made a good point on, if I receive 1 email about this, I'm basically going to give you an automated response. But if I receive 10 or more, I'm going to start thinking, okay, this is really an actual common issue out there. We need to look at this more. So it just kind of motivated me and take note of all the different things we've talked about in the unit that I need to write into, and then motivate my peers and other people within my unit to also write in, so it becomes, escalated as a common issue versus.
Yeah, and you're talking about J.C. Cardinale, who's the legislative affairs essentially for NGAUS. And that was one thing that I think really stood out to me from what he said is I think a lot of us, myself included, are really kind of unaware of how much has actually changed for the National Guard.
Yeah.
Like that comment of actually having, at one point we had to have, punch cards
For the commissary.
for the BX, like just something you just take for granted, right? Just how many things have actually changed just before we even got in.
Yeah.
For us, probably in 10 years, 15 years, maybe at the most, between the 3 of us, as far as total time in service, and how much more can change through these processes.
Right.
The questions that were all asked, I mean, it's one of those interesting things. The questions that were all asked for Hokanson, the general theme is they were all very much legislatively focused,
Right.
legislatively driven questions. They were questions that were outside of his span of control, but within his span of influence. But to know that was where kind of everyone's mind was as company grade officers was really interesting.
He made the comment toward, I think it was the last question or second to last question. He made the comment along the lines that he had more things to take back to Congress after those questions. And you could tell that he was getting feedback on what was kind of in the hearts and minds of the CGOs there. And that was interesting to hear him say, I've got more to take back to Congress now. And you can tell he's engaged. You can tell he's directly engaged on these issues. They mentioned that, Tri-Care Reserve Select. I remember when that came out, that was a big deal. And that was 100% a NGAUS effort to get that. It took him years. And now we're, excuse me, now we're fighting for, for technicians being eligible for TRICARE Reserve Select, right? They're still not.
Well, even MDay, just general MDay, getting TRICARE Reserve Select without a premium.
Right. Yep.
Like, yeah. So right now there's for technicians, I think 2030 is the time when it'll finally be available. But
under current legislation,
current legislation, but to get that where
no premium,
no matter what, no premium, you come in, you're a guardsman, you're covered.
Right.
Would be huge.
I think we need to take an opportunity too for our listeners and our growing audience as this platform potentially grows for us to outline a few items that was talked about as far as things that we could write to Congress to help escalate our voice.
Yeah, certainly.
This is that tool where we could say this is what we talked about, and if everybody who's listening would also write in if they concur with that issue, would then magnify our voice.
Because that's at its core. That's what NGAUS really is a lobbying organization on behalf of the National Guard, right?
And so, as we relay our messages, and I'll just, for instance, list out there, write to Congress about legislation getting passed for getting TRICARE executed quicker than 2030, and how important that and effective that could be for retaining some people, retention and recruiting, and then the pay disparity between technicians and the professional field, right? Like that needs to be fixed sooner than later, so we can get quality technicians and keep the quality technicians we have that would otherwise be leaving for higher pay in the civilian sector,
especially in the technical fields.
Right.
It's hard to hire.
Yeah, we're trying to hire a third engineer in civil engineering.
You just can't.
And we can't compete with the civil sector.
General Hawkinson mentioned that we have these open technician spots that 10 years ago may have been a pretty cushy job, but now they may get one quarter qualified applicant, and that's tough.
Well, and just think about that in the cyber the cyber realm too.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean that's just everyone knows that's going to be a problem, right?
It is now. It is now,
and more so among the lower ranking.
Yep.
The lower ranks of just being able, like, what airmen could make in the civilian sector versus an A1C or your E1s through your E4s, E5s.
Once they get the bare minimum certs and experience that a lot of times the Air Force or the Army will pay for them to go to those schools, it's really hard to retain them or get them into a technician spot when they can go and make significantly more money on the outside. Right. So it was heartening to hear that's at the highest levels of leadership that's present on their minds and that they're thinking about this and what the future of the military is going to be.
But if our listeners could also write in
absolutely,
the importance of these issues, how much
absolutely.
that would magnify that voice.
Yeah, and maybe that's something that, from a NGAUS perspective, so all three of us are obviously members of the NGAUS board, definitely enhancing that availability of those types of tools on our own website and different things like that.
Something we need to look into.
Definitely something worth looking into, and definitely something worth discussing. I want to turn it though, because I know you asked a question. I didn't actually see what the question was, but what were you going to ask, General Hokanson?
So it was the same question that I ended up asking to General Brown. Actually, what the future of cyber ISR is in the Guard. This goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago with it's really hard to retain highly proficient soldiers and airmen in the cyber realm, and so that's going to be a difficulty going forward. And it was really the question that I asked General Brown was, what is the future of cyber ISR and what is the Guard's role in that? And he kind of took it a step further, and he mentioned that we're going to have to partner with industry going forward. And it may end up being, this is just my own perception, but it may end up being that in order to retain those highly proficient, we may not be able to retain those highly proficient soldiers and airmen. We may have to partner with them and their companies once they go on to industry. And he kind of alluded to that a little bit in his response. And it'll be interesting to me to see how that develops in the future. But you can tell that it's a very present issue on his mind.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any questions that you would have asked, Joe?
I've got a lot of just things that I'm learning on my own as I'm young and trying to even just figure out my job as a deputy-based civil engineer and the do's and don'ts and red tape and bureaucracy. But aside from a question, what I was just impressed with, like, just one more note on General Hokanson and his address to us is his ambitions and his efforts to try to become an astronaut And then when that fell through, his advice to the rest of the CGOs, because I've seen it too, where people have goals and they have a number one and it doesn't work out and they become deflated and kind of give up on just the military in general. And so I really liked his advice of having a backup plan, a plan B that you can be happy with. Mm-hmm. So, you know, have your plan A and the thing that really drives you, but also be prepared for a plan B or C that you'd feel satisfied with and be happy with. And I just think that's really wise, considering kind of the environment of our generation of, lack of a better phrase, instant gratification and not really getting what you want right away.
And his story about being on a track there to be an astronaut and having really a lot of those ducks lined up for it to work out, and just because Big Army decided to transfer him at one particular time that was not in that track, it didn't work out for him.
One phone call,
One phone call, right?
Ended it.
But then he ended up as the chief of the National Guard Bureau, right?
Because he was open.
Making
himself the best at what he was doing.
Right. Yeah, that was a inspiring story. I think a lot of lessons there.
Yeah. So, well, excellent. I think that's a good summary of what we got today. We've got a lot more obviously coming up. Tomorrow we have separate sessions with both the the directors of the Army and Air National Guard. We also have the Ohio State University coming and doing a couple of sessions with us, one tomorrow and then one on the final day. And I think we'll get back together and recap those tomorrow. But for right now, we've got the governor's reception this evening. So thank you all for listening, and we will be back tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.